things set up here. It's been a couple weeks. Sometimes that means I'm just a little rusty on doing another live stream here. So I want to thank everybody for logging on to today's live stream, Ask Me Anything. It's actually, it's been 2 weeks since we've done one. I was a little busy last week, got caught up in a bunch of drama, but hopefully we're going to be back on roughly the same routine. And there's a couple of upcoming stories that I just want to give you a preview on today while we're talking here, just to give you a sense of some of the stuff that some of these things have been in play for a long time, and so there's kind of a cascade effect that once you start to work on a story for a while, it tends to pop up in the future, especially if there's litigation involved and you're trying to track what's actually going on there. So I want to get into a couple of stories here as well. And I imagine that today, since we just finished the high drama of the 3 Bob night on Friday night, and then Ferguson's kind of meltdown, tyrannical, whiny press conference yesterday, where he brought up my name 13 times in the press conference and basically was threatening me there in that conference. In addition, more significantly, trying to threaten and bully and imprison the 2 candidates who were running against him, claiming that he's the only person allowed to ever run under that name, even if other people have the same name. So anyway, there was a lot of drama around that, and I imagine there'll be some questions about that as well. Anyway, so just the same, there'll be a lot of issues to discuss. Now, it's just since it's been 2 weeks, I always feel like I'm a little rusty here. But before I generally get into some of the first stories here, some of the questions that you're going to ask, just a quick reminder, if you do have questions, when I'm answering them, I'll try to put them up on the screen like they are down below so that you can kind of see what question I'm working on, even if I have actually gone off entirely down a tangent, which has not been an unknown scenario to occur. I did do a video today that I anticipate trying to get launched. I might just stay here in the studio tonight and just kind of prep it up and get it launched before I go home, or maybe I'll just launch it. I'm going to try to launch as quick as I can. So it's essentially finished, but you have to, that you're just going to have to try to, we'll have to see how fast I can get it up. There's always a little bit more work. I finished filming it, but it takes a little bit of time to finish the prep to actually launch the video. So we'll see if I can do that tonight. And I believe I can. And it's just a question of whether I get it done here or whether I can get it done a little bit later. So I wanted to talk about that. One of the things that I definitely want to mention is that Bob Ferguson definitely was a complete crazy person in that conference. Definitely the mask of the inner tyrant inside came out. If you probably heard, I was on the radio on a couple shows today, Ari Hoffman and also Jason Rantz talking about some of this. And I think that Ferguson's kind of panic and bizarre behavior and just these instant go to prison threats against people who are running against him for the same office were highly aggressive and unusual. I've actually never seen a politician do that before anywhere in the state of Washington, and particularly it's significant that you saw Attorney General Bob Ferguson doing this and why it carries so much weight, and the threat of from his office and from his position. I mean, here you got a guy that basically he's the highest law enforcement officer in the land, in the state. He has the largest law firm and the most litigious law firm with 800 some odd attorneys there in-house. In addition, he's got billionaires that fund his political campaigns. He's got special interests like the unions that fund his political campaigns. All the wealthy elite in the state essentially line up behind him. And another kind of concealed element of his influence that you're able to have when you're the Attorney General is that the Attorney General actually controls or generally kicks out a lot of legal contracts to other people that other law firms for outside counsel. Now, 800 attorneys are not enough, so they have to bring in all this outside counsel all the time. And conveniently, a lot of those firms that the AG's office also consist of attorneys and partners that just happen to be given donations to Bob Ferguson's campaign. it's a pretty incestuous little world, but it ends up meaning that most of the major law firms in the state are somewhat conflicted. If the state's coming after you as an individual and Ferguson's threatening you, then not only does he have substantial influence over the judges, the largest, massive, litigious law firm in the state of Washington, he also basically has a lot of influence with the majority of the major law firms in the state. And he's able to buy that influence using taxpayer dollars out of the AG's office, and then some of that gets fed back into his campaign as campaign contributions. So it's one of the things that, just from an ethics standpoint, I've always thought was a problem for the Attorney General's office, and Bob Ferguson has manipulated that element of the process more than anybody else ever has. So it's kind of one of these issues that makes a very scary threat to individuals like these two guys who decided, one from Graham and one from one from Yakima. Sorry, I was thinking about this question here, but the two Bob Fergusons, one from each of those cities, Graham and Yakima. It's a very scary thing to have the most powerful law enforcement officer with all these resources behind him basically say, we're going to put you in prison for 10 years if you dare to keep running against my campaign, which is what Bob Ferguson said. I mean, it wasn't even ambiguous. And then he gets Dan Satterberg out of the retirement home, who was kind of a fake nominal Republican at some point in time in his past. And then, but when Norm Mailing died and he needed to get appointment, that's when he suddenly became a Republican. And so he'd been the King County prosecutor for a while. Getting him just out of retirement to kind of sit up there on stage and Bob Ferguson needs to have some patsies around him, and that was Dan Satterberg today or yesterday. So it was interesting. Both those guys I've caught. They don't like me, either one of them, and for many reasons, I think, but certainly because I got them both in trouble with the campaign finance laws a number of years ago. Ferguson, I had filed a citizen action notice case against him, I believe back in 2017, late 2017, and it was catching him breaking Washington State's campaign finance laws. The same laws, actually, that he had gone after Kim Wyman and other Republicans in the past using citizen action notice cases, and then using that as his entree into kind of suing them and trying to strategically stage those lawsuits in order to use them for political gain. And so when I did the same thing back on Bob Ferguson for his own campaign finance violations and got standing to sue him, and I would have sued him, except there were two problems I had. Number one, the state doesn't allow you to pro se litigation like that, meaning represent as in an ex-rel case against against whoever you've caught breaking the law. They won't let you do that pro se. That was a 10-year, well, it's probably 15 years now, court case where they decided you can't pro se ex-rel cases, which means you're representing the state of Washington. You can't pro se that case. But the second thing is, so I needed an attorney at the time, and I remember I went on the Todd Herman show and was begging to get an attorney out there because I was ready to go. I mean, I had the case, it was locked up, it was easy, I was going to be able to sue Bob Ferguson, and no attorney wanted to take that on at the time. That seemed to be a high level of drama and fear, knowing that the Attorney General could come back and blacklist you and do all these other things that he could do. And so the intimidation factor that he had in his office, that even when he breaks the law, he's essentially above the law. Dan Satterberg was a little bit less significant in the sense that I caught him taking illegal over-limit anonymous contributions at the time, and he did have to forfeit some of those funds back to the state. But when you get caught breaking the law, and I'm the guy that files those complaints and catches you red-handed, it doesn't make you super happy with me if you're a politician. And so it was kind of interesting that the two of them basically, the two of them there are colluding on that press conference yesterday. And Ferguson mentioned my name 13 times. I mean, he just was going off. I mean, I made a little clip of it, actually, and I played it. I have it in my video coming up. But I also want to point out that Bob Ferguson, using his office and using that position, also during that press conference, significantly violated state law in the sense that he was attempting to, one of his remedies for the problem that he was number 13 on the list of candidates, and that the other two good Bob Fergusons were number 2 and number 3. So in the list of candidates that come out on the ballot, he was super pissed about that and just had gone totally nuclear about it. And so what he was trying to do is direct Secretary of State Hobbs to move the Attorney General's name from number 13 on the list all the way up to the top of the list, which is completely illegal. And as the head law enforcement guy, attempting to force or threaten basically the Secretary of State to do something that's patently illegal for your own personal benefit, not because it's the right thing to do, but directly for your own personal benefit, that is definitely a violation of the law. And I want to get into some of the legal issues on that later on, but it was an epic case of watching. Like I said, the mask of the inner tyrant has come off, and this is who Bob Ferguson, the Attorney General, is actually going to be. He will threaten to imprison his enemies. He'll threaten to imprison anybody who dares to run against him. He's going to pretty much threaten everybody, just like he's gone after restaurants and state workers and anybody, any aspect of your freedom and liberty. This is who he is. And I'm not the only one. What happened is after that press conference, I was also contacted by another candidate also running for office who claims that she's been threatened by Bob Ferguson as well. So I think these threats from his office and from him against anybody who dares oppose him is pretty consistent across the board. And the problem is when you have somebody like that who's so tyrannical, who weaponizes their office in a way to do destructive and harmful things, all for self-serving purposes, which is to promote himself in this endless ego-driven sort of process, and highlight just how abusive you're willing to be on just little citizens who don't have a lot of resources, who are actually willing to step up and run for office for the same position you're running for, and because you don't like them or you think that the fact that they're running could potentially impact your own case, then that's when you see situations like this happen. And exposing just how tyrannical and abusive he is and his willingness to threaten imprisonment to people who he doesn't like should be a terrifying thing for anybody who actually cares about getting somebody into office that's not just comprehensively corrupt in every measurable way. And I want to talk about his corruption sometime during this case. So even though I'll jump into some of your questions, I'm going to start hitting this on Bob Ferguson's endless corruption, because the guy's just been a corruption factory, particularly since he's been in the AG's office. And he has been very easy for him to just look the other way and ignore genuine problems out there that are significant and problematic. For instance, when Seattle had whole sections of Seattle were seized and seceded from America temporarily in the Chaz Chop Zone, where they become lawless zones of violence and people were murdered there. Did Bob Ferguson at all ever get involved in that? He was not. He was completely away without leave, never said a word, disappeared from the scenes, and he vanished. Now, he didn't do what Governor Inslee did at the time, which is pretend he didn't know what was happening, but which that lasted only for a couple days for Inslee. But you would think that the lead law enforcement officer in the state, who at least pretends to care about something about public safety, would be involved in that. But of course, he's not. Bob Ferguson is the guy, in conjunction with Inslee. I don't know exactly which one to put in as more influential on this policy, but it was Bob Ferguson who signs off on it, is the guy who released violent sex predators into the community and conceal that from the public. I've written articles about it. That's what's going on. That guy is exactly who you're going to get as governor, somebody who cares not at all about the truth, somebody who's going to abuse his power more than probably anybody else in modern history if he is able to get his hands on the full levers of power that he can get out of the governor's office. And I think that this press conference he held yesterday just exposed exactly who he is. So in his self-serving, kind of ego-driven world, that's who he is. He will do whatever he thinks he can to whoever he has to for self-service and to promote himself. And that is Bob Ferguson in a nutshell. So one real quick question, as I go to some of these questions that you're posting up here, I want to make a point. If you can, say @WeTheGovern. It's a little bit easier for me to pull up these questions. There's a lot of them coming up here, and I'm going to have to start getting to some of these. First, I'm going to address this question right down here, which is from Walter's Adventures, and it says, can a citizen request a salary audit of city employees? Yelm has 15 plus employees earning $100,000 with a population of 11,000. Property taxes keep rising. Something seems off. And the answer is yes, and actually it's not that hard. It's not really an audit, what you're requesting. I mean, it's a public record just exactly how much every government employee in Washington State makes, so they can't hide that. I do recommend, though, that the salary is usually only a small part of it. If you go in there and you get a list of, say, all employees making more than $100,000, which is a common kind of cutoff point that people ask for when they're looking for these records, remember that salary is just a small, I mean, it's a big part of what they're compensated, but the true cost to you, the taxpayer, for the true cost to the taxpayer is going to be substantially more than whatever their salary is. So it's their salary plus other benefits, bonuses, and other things that don't show up on the salary schedule. And so if you're actually going to look at the true compensation costs of public workers, you actually need to request all their compensation. There's a level of detail in the medical record stuff that they have to tell you what the whole amount is, but they don't need to break that down just for privacy reasons. But you can actually get that full report. I've done this many times. It's been a few years since I've done it. I have looked as well, if you are looking at state records, so in other words, because there's massive numbers of state employees, you can actually go and you can get, that is live. So you can, if you know the name of who you're looking for, you can look it up that way. Or you can just scroll through the endless database that tells you everything that they're being compensated for. But again, if you actually want to know the true full compensation, you're going to need to file a records request with that. It doesn't matter whether it's Yelm, Thurston County, or any other place. The other thing that was interesting years ago, I remember looking at this too, you can go in and look at the state database or request a record. I don't think this is online, but I remember getting the public record of this, is compensation for the retirement fund. And so every public worker that is collecting money off the retirement fund, that is also public record. And so you can get that whole database and see how much people are being paid on an annual basis out of the state's retirement fund. And so you get, and what the largest amounts that are being compensated for are. And there's a lot of interesting things you can get there. Let me just encourage you that if you're looking at a city like Yelm, that probably, it sounds like a lot, but I'm going to tell you that that's probably fairly typical for most cities and counties. But as we hit the financial wall pretty soon, one of the things that we may want to think about is if you're going to have any cuts, you're going to need to cut. We as citizens who live in these places, we're going to have to look at cutting some of the higher paid workers. The tendency of budget cuts when they come through is for those high paid workers to defend themselves and then find ways of cutting entry-level workers, which is where actually real work is actually being done in the state. And so oftentimes the people who are actually a bigger return on the dollar for what you're paying for, the people, maintenance people, road work folk, people doing in a city, any kind of entry level type work, or a lot of times that's customer level service work. Those people are actually providing some value for the position they're in. What you're going to find in government is there's a lot of bloated middle management and upper management that isn't providing that much value. And if you got rid of a lot of those people, or streamlined it, or combined some job descriptions together, you would get certainly a more efficient government than what you currently have. Sorry, because that was a long answer for that question, but I love it when people get into that level of detail. Well, I've been up to a lot, and I've been very busy. Whenever you have filing week is always a busy time, so that has kept me busy quite a bit. But thanks for asking. So I'm back, hopefully, into regular routine. I want to talk about a lawsuit that was just resolved too. That's kind of a follow-up on one of the questions that we had, or a story that I'd done in the past. So this is a question from Barab Sharab, sorry. What are your thoughts on the other two Bob Fergusons that you ran threatening to be sued by Hobbs and Ferguson? Do you think this can be used against him in the general election? Well, listen, I mean, the reality is you can't run anybody. The reality is they decide to run for themselves. So there were two Bob Fergusons who were willing to run for governor and had aspirations to be governor, both of whom in every measurable way were better than Bob Ferguson, by far. There was no doubt about it. Yeah, I mean, and I realize that the Attorney General sets the bar very low. Many people have recognized that the truth is you could probably pull a fentanyl addict off the street, and that would be better than Bob Ferguson in office. At least the fentanyl addict wouldn't be spending their whole time trying to find ways to imprison you or destroy the state. But both of these Bob Fergusons had aspirations to be governor. They were both planning to run campaigns. I was the campaign manager for both of them. Volunteer, yes, nothing paid. It was a very small budget operation, but they both had a plan to run for governor, but that got aborted pretty quick when you're threatened with imprisonment. So it's very hard to actually defend yourself when you're threatened with imprisonment. I mean, it's just, it's crazy. We always thought probably that anybody could actually run for office, anybody, anywhere. The state law actually says that it encourages and wants people to go out and get more involved in the political process. It's explicit about that. But of course, there's also ways that political insiders, like Attorney General Bob Ferguson, will use to protect what they believe is their fiefdom and inheritance. And he, being the Attorney General Bob Ferguson, actually wants you to believe that he is owed this governor's seat. He got Christine Gregoire, pulled her out of the retirement home too. He's just dragging all these people out of retirement homes right now and getting them to come out and say that the Attorney General Bob Ferguson is the only choice anybody should be allowed to have in the state. And that was his big argument, and everybody else should go to prison. So it's ridiculous. This is an incredibly nasty exposure of exactly what kind of a tyrant we have trying to run here. And he's definitely deciding to do that right now. Let's see. Ray, I'm not sure that I understand your question here, but why so many levies when back in the 90s said if you vote in Cass? Do not know what you're getting at. So I will try to interpret that question if I can. Levies, they're run for a variety of reasons, and they usually run them in February and April. There used to be a third date for that, I think in May, but they've changed that. So that was a good thing to eliminate that third date. So you have these two dates, which make it very confusing because they're low participation votes because they're tax increases. And the people who are pushing for tax increases, which are usually schools, but also includes fire districts and local cities, pushing basically Proposition 1s, right? Just tax increases for whatever reason that they have. And there's a million reasons they can come up with. Parks, the children, butterflies and bluebirds, just whatever they want to make up. Mostly they've been in schools lately, and and there's two different kinds. So one is a levy, which means it has to be renewed every 2 to 4 years, depending on which type of levy they've run. And the other one is a bond, which is roughly a 30-year bond. Sometimes they're 25 years, but that means that's usually for capital projects and a debt. And a debt like that, which tends to be a big dollar ticket item, that gets drug out over a long period of time. So it sits on your property as basically an overhang, a debt associated with the property tax collection, and which is usually, it's collected by the county treasurer, and so that's how you're paying it, and then they divide it up to where it needs to go. But that just takes a 60% threshold. So bonds are a little bit harder for them to pass. It requires 60% of the people who participate in that election to approve it, whereas levies only take a majority. And so they like these off-year elections because they figure by suppressing the vote turnout in those off-year elections, they're more likely to get the people to vote for them. If I was going to do a reform when it comes to levies and bonds, I would actually put both of them on the November ballot and have none of them in those early special election windows, because I think that reduces the amount of participation in the voting process, which is an outcome that in theory our political elite claim that they want to have. And if you do that, I think we would have a more accurate representation of what people really think about those levies, which is why they don't want to put them in November, but that's still what we should do. So I'm hoping that, okay, there we go. Sorry, maybe this is your corrected question here. Back in the 90s, they said if you vote in casinos, you'll never see levies again. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. Because that's right, because when they allowed gambling, they said that was going to pay for schools. Well, that was a lie, right? I mean, I'm sorry, they frequently lie. Government lies to you pretty much every time they get up and promise whatever dream utopia you're going to get for that tax increase. And their lies are endless, they're legion, and they've been around since the first invention of government in the first place. And most people shouldn't believe their lies, and it's funny how they'll get these people to come out and defend them, and then immediately they they being the people running the government who just got all that money, and then all their promises vanish, and all their defenders that were originally there so excited and happy to push that tax, they all seem to vanish and go away. And that is what happens. I remember the same thing happened when there was this 1639, the anti-gun initiative that Bob Ferguson helped write, and I had done the ballot title challenge on it. That ended up making them spend a lot more money, and it was a big fight in court. And then another drama afterwards when it turned out they violated the law, which they were given a free pass on by the Supreme Court to essentially get it on the ballot. It was there's a lot of nuance associated with this, but. at the time, there was this whole campaign going on, and these activists were imported from Florida, and they were basically run around the state of Washington pretending that that they cared about this issue in the state, and they were complete pathological liars. And I had a kid from Florida in this debate up in Whatcom County, I remember, and he just lied. He was just a liar. And as soon as that thing passed, that horrible bill, he just vanished. He disappeared. You never saw him again, of course, because he was just a hitman for hire that they bring around the country whenever they're trying to take away your freedom and destroy your future. And that's kind of the way a lot of these local levies get passed. Now, listen, levies by themselves are not an ineffective way to cover certain costs in local government. I think they should be rare, I think they should be small, and I think they should be targeted for very specific and discrete projects that have a clear end and a clear value to provide to the community, not just a special interest kickback machine. And it's going to take us a lot of work to get back to a world like that. Daniel Morrison, you got a question here. Have you seen William Kirk's video on the Washington gun law about the 2 Fergusons running for office? I did not. And actually, in total, there were 3 Fergusons running for office. Now there are only 1 after the 3rd Ferguson out decided to threaten to imprison the other 2. So that's what's going on. Greg, I'm assuming you are talking about Bob Ferguson there. And yeah, but when you're in the government, and maybe he should go to jail, but that's how Ferguson rolls. He wants to put everyone else in prison so that it'll be easier for him to put you in prison. That's what it looks like. And another question, how is that not corruption? No, of course it is. Bob Ferguson's totally corrupt, and I'm sorry that if you're just discovering this today, I'm happy to help get you educated on this. But the reality is, I cannot possibly think of a more corrupt politician we could dig out of Washington right now. Maybe Frank Chop is that corrupt, but he's not quite as nasty. I don't know. It's hard to figure out. There are a number of corrupt politicians. But let's talk about some of the reasons why Bob Ferguson is personally quite corrupt in this whole process. One of the other things that he's done since he's been in the AG's office is this mass destruction of public records in an effort, targeted destruction of public records to conceal the truth and to hide the truth so that he can hurt people like the Oso landslide victims, which the court ruled and chastised the AG's office. And Bob Ferguson came out at the time and said, oh, we won't do that again. We got better policies in place now. Immediately, they were destroying records after that. The other case that was settled where they had to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to disabled workers because the attorneys that work for Bob Ferguson, and remember, this is a culture of corruption, that he has directed them, and they, of course, they're pretending that they just made all these decisions on their own, but they live in a world and a culture of corruption. And that culture of corruption comes right from AG Bob Ferguson himself and goes right down. And if you saw the press conference yesterday, you shouldn't be surprised that that's there. This is entirely about self-serving and promoting the ego and the political will to power and the quest for the full levers of power that he wants to get in the governor's office. So the destruction of public records in the open and obvious times they've been caught. And keep in mind, these are only the times that they had a law firm that they were faced off with and, usually a defendant or plaintiff, depending on whether they were suing the state or the state was coming after them. And I think most of these cases, the other people were plaintiffs. They had firms that really could fight it out long enough that they could actually last to the point where they could discover these records. And usually they found them by accident, right? They had been concealed and hidden, and they just weren't destroyed enough for the Attorney General employees to get away with it. This is just how the Attorney General rolls. Keep in mind, too, the extortion vote buying efforts that are coming out of Bob Ferguson's office with the chicken tuna checks, where he essentially would pick businesses that he can extort cash from. In this case, it was canned tuna and chicken suppliers, claiming that they had jacked up rates sometime years ago. And so what he did is, they finally pay him off because they don't want to keep staying in court. He takes that pool of cash, saves it for a while, and then decides, okay, I'm running for office now. Now's the time. I'm going to send this out to people that I want to vote for me. And so Ferguson, because he has terrible name ID and not very high name recognition, decided to use those tuna chicken checks to buy votes. and he sends them out with his name all over it, right? He doesn't actually sign the checks, but his name is in the upper left corner there defining, hey, here's my tuna chicken check to you. He's so incompetent and ineffective, and that whole office is, that they sent it to thousands of dead people. Now, maybe that's just one way to bribe the dead people to vote for him too, I don't know. And lots of people don't exist at all. And when I say dead people, I'm talking people who have been dead for decades sometimes. So that's Bob Ferguson. That's who you have. Worse than that, he further violated Washington state ethics laws when he goes out and he sends out all the reminder letters to everybody saying, hey, just to remind you, I'm the guy that sent you that big check, and I can buy a vote for $200, $250. And that's, or $40, I guess it depended on what size of check you got. And so it's just this vote buying scheme using public money that comes to the state. Ferguson alone, I've never seen any other politician in state history use this money to buy votes so clearly. And keep in mind, this is different than when some of the problems that it looks like that we've uncovered in the past, where people who get ballots to vote, non-U.S. citizens or something, they get registered to vote against their will. They don't know what to do with them, and then people come up and buy those ballots from them. The going rate in the last few years on that's been about $30 a ballot. They can sell them for about $30, and then presumably somebody else ends up voting for them. I don't know, but these are the type of scams. Now, does Bob Ferguson look at that? Of course not. He likes it because I think he presumes he's the one that's the beneficiary of a purchased illegal ballot. However, that's kind of part of the corruption problem that we have here with him, because he's always willing to look the other way when it comes to government corruption. Remember the $600 million that disappeared out of the Employment Security Fund. Bob Ferguson made sure that nobody ever could figure out, never could find, and nobody looked really to figure out exactly who internally at that department decided to make it easy for all that money to disappear and nobody to notice. That's where your taxpayer dollars go. And Washington State's not alone. Every government has its problem of corruption. We just would prefer that the political class, like Bob Ferguson, doesn't facilitate it and then not want to actually solve the problem. Let's see. Hi, Glenn. This isn't a political question. I seem to ask for some advice. I have my piano recital this Friday night. Do you have any tips for overcoming stage fright? Well, I have to tell you, if I had a piano recital, I'd have stage fright too. So I don't have any answers to that one at all, because I don't really get stage fright anymore. And I imagine that if you speak in front of public, that you don't get that. And I don't remember actually what it was like too much to get in front of people and have stage fright. I do remember completely flubbing a presentation once that I did in public years ago. And it was, I was doing startup company work, and I had the owner of the company that I was working for was going down to San Francisco to do a presentation on Sand Hill Road, if you're familiar with venture capital. Funding, especially in the early 2000s, right before the dot-com crash, it was a big deal. And they would have this whole room. Well, I didn't know this. He was going to go down and do this presentation. And what happened is his wife went to the hospital that night. And so I got this late night call at like 10 p.m. saying, you got to go to the airport at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Fly down there and do this presentation for me. And I actually wasn't too worried about that because I was quite familiar with the product that we were developing, because I was the head of operations there. So I developed this product from the beginning. It was a medical device, but it was kind of a high-tech medical device. Anyway, he said, I've had the employees make up a custom presentation and they'll give it to you at the airport. So I didn't even have a chance to look at whatever it was that he wanted me to present. And so I didn't have the talking points. I didn't know what it was. I got on the airplane and I remember sticking on my laptop to try to look at it. Things were not as sophisticated in the early 2000s. And I remember realizing there was something completely wrong. It wasn't working. And like a fool, I decided to still go up on that stage. And it was one of these really intense type presentations where they have a spotlight that comes on you and you do your presentation on one side and then it's set on a timer. And once the timer's done, spotlight goes off, shifts to the other person, spotlight on them. It's a huge room, hundreds of people, venture capitalists, supposed to be, a big deal. So you're just up there in the spotlight and there's all this tension, and the whole thing, of course, a disaster. I actually did so bad, I think I had PTSD on that. I don't even remember what I did in that presentation. So when it comes to stage fright, I don't know if that's what happens, where you kind of get this PTSD and you just don't even remember the fiasco that you had on stage. But it's been a long time since I felt that way. But I wasn't a public speaker at all until about 15 years ago, and I don't get it now. And I think the main thing is know your subject matter and know what you're doing. If you're doing a piano recital, then if you know what you're doing on that piano, you focus on what you're trying to do, and I think you're far less likely to get stage fright. I don't know if he got beat up a lot when he was in school. It could be true, but I don't know. Let's see. Rodeo Russ, yes. Yeah, there were some changes. And actually, oh gosh, there's a lot of questions coming up here. There was a lot of people who, of course, jump in on filing week. And really, it takes a lot more time right now, and I need to spend the time to go through it. I would have wanted to do that if I wasn't dealing with 3 Bob night discussion over the last couple days and all the drama, and Ferguson threatening to come after me, too. So I would have had a little bit more time to prepare to talk about those specific issues. But yes, Smiley jumped in out of left field into the 4th congressional race. So everybody, the silly thing about this, right, is that the jungle primary is gamed in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different gamemanship that goes on into it, and it probably makes the process far worse than anybody realizes, because it's not about whether you have a good candidate in the race. When you have the jungle primary, it takes, the reason why money matters, the reason why I've talked about that before in the past, is that you have to get your name out there substantially to a wide, just a huge audience, right? And it's marketing. It's essentially what you can do is take that money and put some marketing into it. So Smiley jumping in here dilutes the Republican vote in that race. Dan Newhouse is the incumbent congressman there. And after the Republican convention, when they endorsed Jared Sessler, who's running against him in that same race, Smiley jumping into it dilutes it further with these 3 different people. So I'm not sure what that looks like moving forward in that race. It's going to create a bit of churn and drama. There were also some Democrats who jumped in that race. There were a lot of people in that race, and I didn't get a chance to see how many of them dropped out on Monday because I was a little more focused on the Bob Fergusons who were being threatened imprisonment for daring to run against our Attorney General. Did you hear, this is from Chaz E., did you hear about the allowing for the homeless camp in Tumwater meeting tonight? They will not allow for public comment. Of course they won't. If you get enough people who are either bought off or bought into the homeless industrial complex in your local government, then they will promptly destroy your community by deciding to set up homeless camps and homeless junkie facilities all over the area. Tumwater has actually generally resisted, and so has Lacey. Generally, they've resisted the self-immolation that the city of Olympia has gone under, but which are the 3 cities that are right next to each other in Thurston County. But I think that what you see happening right now is there's so much money into this, and all these nonprofits are getting a phenomenal amount of cash out of this. So of course they're going to use any excuse they can to influence the elected officials to make sure that they can import more drug addicts and homeless and mental patients into that community, so that they can justify getting more, just getting more money coming in. It's always about the homeless industrial complex, and yes, in the parks or at businesses or anything else like that. You're looking for getting a copy of the budget. I always recommend people start with the money, follow the money, and you will find almost everything you need to find off. Let's see. TZ Burton, hi. You pissed off Brandy Cruz with the Bob's triplets. That was awesome. Listen, I'm not trying to upset. I like Brandy Cruz, and so I've always appreciated her interview style back when she was working for some of the more traditional media, and I actually like her a lot more now that she's independent. That doesn't mean that we would need to agree on everything, but people always see things differently, and that's fine. We do live in a free country, and unlike the left, it is acceptable for people to disagree on the freedom-oriented side of equations, and we can discuss things and argue about them later on, so that's fine. Let's see. Nathan, I'm assuming you're asking, so Nathan Klubler, so as far as a Republican governor, how does Dave Reichert compare to Sammy Byrd? These are the 2, realistically, I think these are the 2 leading Republican candidates out of the 28 total candidates for governor that are on the ballot now. There's a couple things that differentiate the 2 of them. Since I spent a lot of time on the Public Disclosure Commission site, that's the place I usually start, who's raised the most money. I haven't checked in the last few days, but, there was a big difference, a big delta. So Reichert, I think, had probably 6 to 7 times more funds raised than Semi Bird. That makes it a little bit harder to compete in the election process there. Semi Bird got the endorsement of the Republican Party, so that probably gives him a little bit better name recognition in the distribution of any kind of mailings or promotion that comes out of the Republican Party. So there's some benefits to that. Reichert probably has pretty good name recognition, especially in the area that he used to be in Congress. And then because he had been in Congress for a while, even though that was about 5 years ago, I would say he probably gets a little bit better name recognition out there. One of the challenges that I would think if I was in Dave Reichert's shoes is that Mark Mullet, who's actually running as a Democrat, to some extent is probably taking some votes that might otherwise go to Reichert. It's not going to be unfair. My presumption is that Mark Mullet doesn't come out of the primary, but it wouldn't be unfair to actually combine those two votes with some percentage difference, but to understand the percentage return where Dave Reichert is presuming he gets through the primary, where he would actually end up in the general ballot with that level of turnout that you would have in August. So. I think Semi Bird is a really good, one of the things that he does really well. I think he speaks really well, and I think he does really good retail politics. If you've ever been to an event with him, he's really good at that. And one thing I have found is it's very hard for somebody who's been in law enforcement to have that same kind of outgoing personality most of the time when they're out campaigning for office. I've actually worked with quite a few law enforcement officers, helping them run for office before, people who are sheriffs or police chiefs are involved in that kind of thing. They don't doorbell very well. And they don't doorbell very well because I think that there's this instinctive kind of thing that their history of being a law enforcement officer going to people's front door is a very different experience than a candidate trying to go door to door. You're working through an apartment complex or a neighborhood. Police officers are usually going to your door to get witness statements, serve a warrant, pick up bad guys, sometimes wellness checks. I mean, a lot of unpleasant experiences that they probably have over time with that type of process. And I think that with Dave Reichert being the former King County Sheriff and a law enforcement officer for many years, that probably makes that process a little bit harder for him too. And but there's always going to be pluses and minuses, between the two of them. Those are your two Republican candidates. They both have websites up. It's easy to go and review them. I have interviewed Semi Bird on our channel before. I have offered to interview Dave Reichert. So, and if he's willing to give me an interview, I will interview him as well. Let's see. Hope that you're doing well. This is from Jason Fitcher. What do you make of I'm assuming you mean threats, not treats, by Ferguson against the other Fergusons? Will he go through with prosecuting them? Well, Jason, I don't know. I mean, imprisoning your political enemies is something I always thought that they would do in Venezuela or Russia or maybe, Zimbabwe or something. But it looks like in our Attorney General's mind, as long as it's protecting himself, then he's going to be willing to do that here. And speaking of shenanigans, like significant questionable shenanigans in the state, and this is, I want to go back to when Mark Mullet was first elected state senate. You had Cheryl Flug, who was a Republican senator in the 5th Leg District at the time, and she was bribed with a position on the Growth Management Hearings Board. And I'm explicitly using that term because that's the exact accurate term as to what happened to her. Now, it's a legal bribe in our state. You can give somebody a fancy job and put them into office. And she waited, though, and it was a deal between her and the Democrats that she waited until the last day to drop out so that the Republicans couldn't find somebody to replace her and run for that position, an incumbent position that they had. The Democrats, which would have included Inslee and Ferguson at the time, they were kind of involved in this effort to try to switch control of the Senate. This actually failed at the time, right? But it didn't fail in that district. That's originally how Mullet kind of had a walk in the park getting into the state Senate seat originally. I don't personally believe that Mullet was actually involved in negotiating that level of corruption. I think it happened independent of him. But that kind of stuff, bribery and all that stuff, that's the kind of stuff that Ferguson's happy to support, and it happens all the time. It happens every single election cycle, but only when somebody's going to run against Bob Ferguson and potentially threaten him, then you're going to go to prison. And that's why he was willing to threaten those guys. So Anyway, the let's see. Here's one right here. Semi listens to people. Dave Reichert listens to his peers. I'm assuming you mean peers with P-E-E-R-S. And I mean, listen, here's the reality. If you're a politician, you're going to generally have a close circle of people, especially if you're running for office. And you're going to be, that's who you're going to listen to. You will get feedback, and especially if you do a good job with retail politics, I think you're going to get pretty good retail feedback from people in the community if you're comfortable doing that. A lot of people aren't. I love doing that, but I don't know that everybody is that way. So it's just a different thing. So then this is another question. I thought state law says that people with the same name can't run for governor if someone has filed prior to the other people with the same name filing. Actually, with that statute, it's even worse than that. And by the way, this is probably quite unconstitutional because you don't necessarily own your name, and the legislature recognized this. Sometimes, actually, presumably it would have been the Secretary of State recognized it, because there's a WAC that is a remedy to this issue. If you have people and they're worried about any kind of confusion, then the WAC allows you to add an identifier underneath it that says this is a retired state worker, this is a retired combat vet, this is a lawyer, right? Whatever it is, and you're allowed to put that if you think that's a problem. And so, and it's not that it has the same name, it actually is similar surname is what it is. So they ignore that sometimes. When Adam Smith had another Smith running against him in his race a little while ago, nobody cared, and there's a number of examples of this out there, but it really only matters if you're Bob Ferguson and you have the power of the state behind you so that you can threaten to imprison anybody who dares to actually be a regular citizen and decide to run against you. The other weird thing about it is if they had filed before he had filed, then that statute wouldn't apply at all, which is even weirder still. It actually says political reputation, which is also strange because what kind of reputation are we talking? I mean, so if you have a different reputation, then it doesn't apply. I mean, there's just a lot of interesting issues related to this that are probably very unconstitutional. But regardless, imprisoning people because they're running against you is probably not the attitude that you want people to take. There was a very easy solution that the WAC had that would have been perfectly appropriate here. But instead, Bob Ferguson wanted to violate state law and threaten the Secretary of State and tell him that he was going to move his own name to the top of the list as one of the remedies. I mean, it was just ridiculous. That's how it is. Let's see. Just came on. Q, do you think Byrd has a good chance of taking the governor's seat? Many people are excited about him becoming governor. Well, I don't know. And remember, there's two elections. So you have the August election sorts out the 28 people that are currently running for that position and drops it down to 2. So top 2 come through, whoever they are. And the problem tends to be when you have a flooded zone of that many people, it's just hard to know. I mean, this is one of the downsides of the top 2 primary system. Not the only downside, but one of them. And so we just have to see. I mean, it benefits incumbency. I think the top 2 primary tends to benefit incumbency a lot, and even more than normal. It also makes it very hard for people, so that makes it very hard for newer people to come into the process and actually get through that. Usually they don't get threatened with imprisonment, but that's what Bob Ferguson did this time. Who knows on chances? That we're a long ways away from August. And the reality is it's July. July is when the ballots go out. And a lot of people will vote those ballots that first week. About a third, big chunk of them get voted right then. So after that, you're just losing the percentage of potential vote impact you can have as a campaign. And so you're really campaigning super hard up until that first week in July or so when the ballots get sent out. And so anyway, so that's a problem that we have here. If a random, I'm assuming you mean random here, fentanyl addict, and I'm assuming you mean the drug fentanyl, on the street is better than Sideshow Bob, let's run him. Sure, but you would have had to file him last week. So we're a little past that point. Christine Gregoire isn't necessarily a good endorsement, even amongst Democratic voters are old enough to remember what a disaster she was. Wasn't that movie Black Sheep basically about her? I don't know about the movie Black Sheep, so I'm not sure. But yeah, no, I mean, you're dragging the dregs of political, elites out of the woodwork to help you get elected. But that's what people do sometimes. Let's see. Mobus here, do you think it's a constitutional violation to close elementary schools when it's a paramount duty to ensure adequate education? It kind of varies on the situation and why they're being closed. So if they're closing elementary schools because they don't have enough population in the district, as we've seen in both Seattle and Bellevue recently, and so they're shifting those, they're essentially shutting them down, but they're moving those kids into another school, it's no violation at all. If they're shutting them down because they want to stick a homeless camp or a immigrant community in the gym and the kids can't go to school, then I would argue it probably is. So it really varies, and it depends on the reason why they're shutting it down. So anyway, we'll see how that goes. I think this is the question that you had posted earlier, just hadn't gotten to it. So that one I already asked. There we go. Another one. Did you watch the latest news a few hours ago about the Israel-Hamas war? And I didn't. Where Israeli forces are fighting Hamas militants. Israeli Defense Forces vowed to press on into Rafah even without the support. I didn't, so I didn't watch the news. Usually on Tuesdays I'm doing a lot of work to prep for videos, and I'm not looking at the news quite a bit. So let's see. And here's another. This is, I cringe. I'm assuming you're talking about Bob Ferguson, the thought of Little Rambo getting his arrogant hand in us. Yeah, I mean, anybody should be afraid of that. The tyranny of somebody who's so self-absorbed and egocentric that he's going to imprison just regular people trying to run for office against him. And that open threat of imprisonment is really particularly nasty. So, but again, the true face of the tyrant comes through, and that's how it goes. ITA, do you do internships or some sort of staff that can become active apprentices? I don't, but I do training, and so I'm happy to go out and help people train to be activists where you live. The best way to do that is to train people, a group of people that live in a community, to go out and become more active and be more familiar with what they're doing. So I hope that if you're interested in that, make sure you contact me, usually through my website, my email address there or something, and I'm happy to put you on the schedule and try to find a way to come out and do it. The easiest way to do that is you organize a group of people that want to be trained, and then I come out and do that with you. I try to make it so it's at least 20 people if possible, and if you don't think you have enough in your group, find another group nearby that's also interested in getting some training, and training is customized usually to what you need, and I've generally done that for years, so I'm pretty happy to help you if you're interested in that. Let's see. Integrity here. What would you tell those good Washingtonians that are giving up on the state and moving away? How can we convince more people to stay and fight for representation? Well, I would tell them that you're not going to run away from this. That is a delusional dream that will not solve anything. And particularly right now, I would probably not discourage you from moving out of a city. I think moving out of an urban environment that's decaying fast under Democrat leadership is probably not a bad idea. I think being more rural, but I'm a biased person when it comes to what type of environment you live in, and the quality of life you can have in different locations. Even having a less spacious home, or living rurally, I just think tends to be better. If you think you're going into Idaho and that's going to save you, it will for a few years, and then after that, you're going to be dealing with the exact same things here. Only by then, you'll find out that the Republicans that you thought you had, that you moved into, and they won't let the rights be taken away. Well, you're wrong. They are they're just asleep at the switch because they have no idea what's coming at them. I think if you've been fighting in this state, or a state like Wisconsin or Minnesota, or the way Florida was a couple years ago, once you realize and you're in that fight and you have to prevail, prevailing really makes a big difference, and it shifts the game in the right direction quite a bit if you get involved and stay engaged. You just got to do it. Nathan Kepler, does our state have any chance of having the assault weapons ban overturned? How about the magazine capacity limits? Thanks for your time. You do. And there's a number of different questions as to exactly where they'll get there. I know there's a couple of lawsuits that are going on, and so this is really a longer conversation about which ones. And by the way, one of the easiest ways is just get some better people elected, and you can overturn it that way instantly. It isn't that difficult, but anyway, so we'll see how that goes. We got a lot of work cut out for us, and it does matter who you put in a public office. It really does. And many times people seem to like to fight amongst themselves instead of generally moving in a direction that removes the worst people that we have in public office as a highest priority first, rather than finding some purity test to kick people out that you just don't like as much in safe places where you have pointless fights. You really want to spend your time grinding away on engaging a new place and taking territory. When I say that, territory of good elected officials, flipping cities, flipping county commissions, because that tends to roll up to the state legislature over time. This question from Thunderstriker, you always ask some of the odder questions here, but what if the people who jumped out from the 2 towers of the World Trade Center had parachutes to safely land on the ground without impact? Well, if they land on the ground, they're still going to have an impact. If you've ever used a parachute before, and I used to skydive, certainly from the high towers, you had plenty of room. If you were base jumping, you could get out there and do it. So, but you'd have to actually know what you're doing. It won't work if you jump out and the wind's going against you. You open the chute and you just come back and you're impacting the building. Still would rather have that than jumping out without a chute. But anyway, that's always oddball questions. Poor Vashon Island getting high-rise, low-income housing in a treatment facility on their island. What a lovely place to put them. Yeah, they're going to destroy every community they can because there's so much money in it that the grifters who profit from the homeless industrial complex operations, they're going to move out wherever they go, and that's what they're going to do. So anyway, that's what's going on there. I'm sorry you're experiencing that, but it's happening in Whidbey Island, it's happening in San Juan, it's happening all over the place. Up on the peninsula, Eastern Washington, it's happening everywhere. You got to shut down the whole homeless industrial complex if you actually want to solve any of these problems. Let's see. Alex Brown, wait, 28 people running for governor now. What did I miss? Filing week last week. That is the thing you missed because that's when everybody files. And there were 30, now there's 28, and they're off to the races. So D. Bryant, 2024, Article 10, Section 1 of the Washington State Constitution, the McCleary decision model is failing. What action can be done now to, did I say Section 10? I meant Section 9 there. What action can be done to enforce these or change them? Initiative, quote, question mark. The Elms levy failed twice now. You're really just talking more about a school funding model. They did not fix anything with that levy swap program, the levy fix that they had before. That turned out to be a disaster. I think the Republicans got rolled on that and not fully understanding what they were actually implementing. But that's too bad. So we'll see how that goes. Let's see. Have you heard? Here it is. I'm trying to get to questions, guys. So comments, I'll have to skip over those because we're running long into the time here eventually, and I want to get to questions more than just comments. So have you heard about the huge lithium battery facilities they want to hook up to our grid, the kind that take up 5 acres and explode? They are imposing them in rural areas up here, and I don't know where up here is, but I am familiar with some of the problems associated with those types of facilities. The ridiculous part about this is that Washington State has the ability to actually produce a tremendous amount of our power, and the majority of it's already produced by dams. Your hydropower options in the state are actually pretty good. I actually don't even think we take advantage of most of the hydropower options that we have. And if anything, our state needs to look at something different. I don't think the lithium battery facilities are a good idea at all because I think that they're expensive, they have high maintenance issues, and they're jacking up the price of power. They're not reducing the price of power. The objective in providing essentially low-cost power to everybody, which is pretty much a good hallmark of a healthy and modern society, when you're willfully destroying the power grid, which is actively what most of the left in the state's done, and certainly the quote-unquote environmental movement of the special interests that want to push super expensive, unreliable power options into the grid, then that's a bad thing. But it's a great thing if you're one of the grifters who makes the money off of that option. And if you hate, if you don't like Washington or you want to destroy it, it's a good policy to push. And that's what they're doing. And so I think that that's a bad idea. So let's see. My deceased ex-father-in-law voted in the 2020 election. Is Washington State removing the deceased off the voters' registration? if you're saying that they were dead before they voted, that's something I would want to know. I have seen it happen before. It's usually, they don't usually come out back to life just to vote. So usually that means there's some kind of fraud there. Or you've got a miracle on your hands, which would be kind of cool to expose. Theoretically, Washington State removes the deceased off the voter registration. I say theoretically because we find plenty of examples where they don't do this. But there's one of the ways that they're pretty efficient is if you've actually died in the same county that you registered to vote, most of the time the coroner's office actually sends that information directly to the auditor. They'll remove them off pretty quick. If you die or the paperwork's processed for the death of somebody in a different county, that's usually where we notice the problems occur. So somebody staying in a let's just say they live in King County, and the last couple years they're moved into a retirement home or a retirement community down in Pierce County, and they die down in Pierce County. Sometimes that information isn't sent back to King County the way it should. So anyway, we'll see how that goes. Hun E. Badger. Doesn't the law actually say that the same name scenario only apply if the first filer of the same name is running for an incumbent position? If so, how does Sideshow Bob have any standing? Well, he doesn't have any standing in this case, and my belief. I mean, there's a way to interpret it that he can, but and it's not the way that part of the statute's written. The incumbent position is actually a previous segment of the statute, which doesn't apply at all because he's clearly not the incumbent. There's no incumbent running for governor right now. The weird part was filing first. So if the other two Bob Fergusons had filed before AG Bob Ferguson, then he wouldn't have a leg to stand on, and the law wouldn't even apply to him, which is pretty weird. But it's one of the many reasons why that law is from 1943 is probably bizarre. KSD, Kitsap School District or some other school district used to school funding to support Prop 1. Was that legal? And the answer is no. But I'm going to clarify, and it's a violation of RCW 4217A 555. But it would be a misuse of public resources if in their supporting Prop 1, it actually said vote for Prop 1, or it was something unusual in their communication that they sent out to the community. Then it's a violation. But I'm going to tell you that just because they send out something that tells you it's on the ballot, this is their little way of getting around this. We caught them a bunch of times in the past violating the statute, them being school districts. Actually, it's the committees for the school districts, and then the school districts themselves, which is where the violation comes in this case. And because the committees can do mailers in support of it, but they'd be PACs, and they're not funded by public dollars, technically. They shouldn't be. But when the school district sends out that mailer, provided it's an informational mailer only, right, then it's legal. And so what they do, of course, is they bias the informational mailers so much that it's all about promoting Prop 1 without actually saying that will they go out there. Let's see. Here we go. What do you know about Stanley and Chadwick Boseman's death? Absolutely nothing. And the second question there is then how did their passing impact the entertainment industry? No idea. And same thing there. No way to answer that question because I don't know. Not well enough to matter. Let's see. How can Congress, Chris M., how can Congress pass legitimate laws? No question, but without the consent of the government, okay? Particularly sending money out of the nation's coffers. Well, that's what they do, and it's not about you and I. Once they get back in D.C., it tends to be about the lobbyists and the special interests. And even the cumulative impact of the groupthink mentality that tends to exist within various factions within Congress. So it has more to do with who's influenced them, and then they dump all these bills together, and you like this little piece over here that's yours. So you vote for the whole thing because after all, it's not your money, and the rest of it goes to everybody else's little fiefdom piece, and it goes out there. If anything that would really help, I think, is if they tended to draft these laws in a way where they were much smaller and focused, and they couldn't leave that subject matter outside, and you wouldn't have nearly as many omnibus bills. I think there's a lot of problems with those. Let's see. I do think this whole business regarding the candidates nicely displays Bob's vindictive authoritarian side, which I think works against him. If he'd rolled with it, he'd come off looking better. Well, that's true, actually. If he had been such a weirdo and had not come out there looking like a tyrant trying to imprison everybody, I do think Ferguson probably would have done pretty well. I mean, that would have probably helped him. But instead, he looks like a crazy nut job, and especially a self-serving crazy nut job, which people sometimes want to put into office, but hopefully not the majority of them. So we'll see how it goes. I don't know if you can bribe enough people to buy off into your agenda, then I think that's what Ferguson's tried to do, bribe or threaten, and certainly I don't think he can imprison enough people to do that, but we'll see. And that's the big fight that's going on. Remember, in the November election, one of the bigger things that's going on here are these initiatives. The initiatives are the first thing that are going to be on the ballot in November, not August, but November they will be. That's your opportunity to vote for these initiatives. And these initiatives are very positive for the agenda of Washington State. For most average people, it helps reduce your cost of living. One reduces the cost of fuel and heating cost, fuel at home. One has the ability for people to opt out of a payroll tax, so they get to keep more of their own money. And the other eliminates the capital gains tax, which is another big grifting operation that the state runs. These are good things to eliminate these. The average person's going to vote yes, pay less on all three of those. And yes, I know tens of millions of dollars are going to be spent against it by the billionaires like Bill Gates and others who want to keep that cash flowing into their investments. But it is something I think that's going to resonate with the majority of people who actually do get ballots. And, you know, listen, harvesting goes two ways. I'd be out there harvesting ballots like crazy. Practice in August and harvest all the ballots you can possibly get so that more good people get voted into office and that people actually get those ballots in there. And there's a whole nother story as to what ballot harvesting is. But it's legal in our state. Probably shouldn't be, but it is. And so if it is, you need to use it and get out there and do something with it. Let's see, Karen Kyle, do you have any suggestions on how to get our state officials to start looking at geoengineering issues? Well, I don't know what you mean by that because that's a wide-ranging scope of subjects. So I don't have any really good suggestions right now because you have to be a little bit more specific to that. Scenaria Frankenstein. Are there any emergency plans in Washington State, including stocked fallout shelters for citizens in case of nuclear disaster? There are emergency plans. I mean, they've been upgraded quite a bit since the since the Cold War, actually. And they get upgraded periodically since then. After 9/11, there was a big review, and there was a lot more work that was done on them. One of the things to remember is the National Guard in Washington State continuously does practice maneuvers or staging plans and stuff for the Cascadia Fault earthquake. I can't remember what they call those, the plan, but essentially it just envisions a massive earthquake and a huge tsunami and the shutdown of all the traffic and the bridges failing and all this stuff, and then how they do that. So they practice those usually every year in our state, and most of the emergency preparation work is done at a county level, and so there are plans. That doesn't mean that they have stocked fallout shelters, but there are plans for dealing with the disaster. Now, nuclear disaster is a little different, and I'm not sure how they necessarily plan for that specifically, because if it's just one strike, it's probably something you could deal with. If it's a widespread thing, I don't know what plans you have that would come out of that intact. There are stockpiles of emergency supplies in various places in the state. National Guard's involved in some of them, usually emergency prep group, the county emergency organizing entities, depending on how they set that up, are prepared to some extent. Some places have, I know when I was in the school board, we had like some supplies stored in our school district, mainly just in case all the kids or a large percentage of them had a shelter overnight or two. I don't think we had more than a few days worth of supplies on hand, and they weren't the best. I wouldn't consider them the tastiest, and that's probably something that gets cut when a school district runs into tough financial times. But anyway, that's something going on. I skipped this earlier. I want to go back to this. The lithium storage from the Inflation Reduction Act. Okay, yeah, the Inflation Reduction Act gets an extra 10% tax credit for building in energy communities, again, in rural areas like Eastern Washington, Covington. Yeah, they're pushing the lithium out with kickbacks like that. I don't know, though, that lithium storage, 10%, it doesn't sound like a large enough kickback for them to really want to do that. Let's see, Cat and Shade, tuna checks, question mark. Where did they get the name of one non-resident who bought home to give to another with name only briefly on property and utility bill? Assessor, or they claim, so here's the answer to that. They claim to have used Experian, which is like a credit monitoring service. That's what Bob Ferguson said. And so whenever he's involved in a total fiasco like that, he always shifts the blame to somebody else. That's what he's always doing. Same reason, like when you see him at the press conference yesterday, he's trying to drag Dan Satterberg out of the retirement home and put him out there as though, and I don't know what he has over Satterberg's head, but trying to get him to do some of the dirty work for Ferguson so he doesn't look like it. it's sort of absurd. How is it legal that people's wishes are constantly ignored? Well, it's more than just being, it's legal to ignore people, but usually there's consequences, like maybe you get elected out of office and that's what you have to do. Chris, okay, going back to that question. So if that was actually paid for by the school district, so not by the committee, if it was paid for by the committee that supported it and it said, Citizens for Prop 1 or whatever it is, then you just have to look at the PAC to see if they'd actually reported those expenditures. Try to get that information to me if you can. Just go to my website, email it to me through there, and let me know what's going on. I might be able to help you out with that. Thank you, Glenn. Didn't understand your answer. McCleary model's not working. Should citizens write legislators to do an initiative, perhaps? Cuts are being done, starting with teachers. Okay. I'm trying to explain this. Incompetent school board and school districts under the influence of the Washington Education Association stupidly bumped up and overpaid a large number of bureaucrats in particular, administrative staff, and also some teachers, of course, in some of these districts than they could actually financially afford for a long period of time. It actually, to be fair, this didn't specifically have anything to do with McCleary. What this had to do with was some of the money that was coming in from the feds is like, here, we're helping you during COVID. And like most incompetent and corrupt government officials, you grab the money now, even though you don't have a budget for it in the future. So instead of understanding this is a one-time thing to solve one-time problems, dishonest and incompetent, sometimes corrupt local people in government decided then to bump up their budget for that one-time money and not drop it down or not keep it constant where they actually had revenue coming in and using that more as a reserve fund or for specific costs. So your school districts that are doing that are run incompetently. The people running them are incompetent. That's why you're having that problem. Not every school district's doing that. Now, eventually, I think the problem is that when you take that extra money in and you're just bloating salaries, which is 88% roughly of every school district budget, you're not going to have a sustainable model anyway. And when times get tough, FTE, cutting full-time employees, is part of what they end up doing. They'll usually cut other things first. They'll cut your music program. They'll cut your sports, they'll do all that. But eventually, and then the administrators will usually make sure they get cut last, even though that's where I would start cutting, is cutting them first. The bad decisions in the past are going to carry forward in the future. I am appalled that my legislator, among others, has sponsored a guaranteed income bill. How can we fight this outright robbery? Well, I would continually expose that legislator and I would contact him continuously about what a terrible idea it is. Remember, people don't tend to do that. Anyway, that's how it goes. Gave you a thumbs up from all my Ferguson accounts. Thank you so much. I'm glad you did. Let's see. Lisa Brown, Windsurf 1. Lisa Brown, Mayor of Spokane, securing $14 million to help the homeless situation here. What percentage do you think will make it to really help the homeless? This is her first order of business. I don't know, maybe 10%. Most of it gets grifted off along the way. Remember, that money is mostly used and siphoned into all kinds of self-serving, self-promoting projects. So I don't know, maybe 10% gets there to help anybody. It really doesn't, no matter how much money you throw in, it's more like throwing fertilizer out to attract more drug addicts mostly. And because they don't support any program that actually helps get people off drugs permanently. They don't have that. Or that finds permanent solutions for mental patients. In fact, the Democrats, Bob Ferguson, Gregoire, Inslee, all these Democrats have for years done everything they can to destroy the mental health system in Washington State to ensure that they're self-medicating drug addicts on the street, assaulting people and stealing, rather than having them in a facility where they could get some help and actually have some quality of life. That's certainly better than doing that. Lisa Brown is really one of the most corrupt people I can imagine being in Spokane, and so that's just not good. That's one of those issues. Can the Yelm schools tap into $3 billion surplus the state has to make up the $15 million loss from the failed levy? The one thing I think the state would have difficulty doing is cherry picking school districts to send them money, but not to, not other school districts. So I think that becomes a problem. They sort of do that on like school districts that include maybe large Indian reservations or some tribal facilities there, or in an usually historically underserved community that has incredibly low income, they might have grants that specifically can go in and do that. If you're really short $15 million in Yelm, I don't see how the state's going to be able to necessarily help you on that. And your school district out there is probably going to have to sit down and start making some tough decisions. One of the reasons why I think some of those levies in Yelm have failed is that people aren't feeling like the school district's listening to them, and they're not happy with the attitude the school district has had. And by failing to listen to the people and tie your school district in doing what you want for what the people want you to do, you're going to lose those levies. So that's how it gets through. Did Tyron Inslee get that payroll tax through? The payroll tax was actually an SEIU project where they wanted to take money out of everybody's paycheck to pay for long-term care. And of course, it's the worst care ever. Not enough, totally insignificant. It was a weird policy. You had to stay on it for 10 years. If you left the state once, for any period of time, you'd lose it. If you didn't work for a certain period of time, you'd lose it and have to start from zero. It's any private person that would provide, private entity of any kind that would provide the long-term care tax services that they provide would be put in prison for fraud. But in Washington State, that's how they run their operation. And SEIU didn't care because the union just wanted the money for themselves. This is a way to force people to be on the payroll and then collect money from this payroll being kicked out in these different places that SEIU employees supposedly would be working at, just so the union can get kickbacks on the back end. So it's ridiculous. People hate it, and anything you do is more effective, cost effective than the scam that they put on the ballot. And most people recognize that. They want to keep more of their own money. They don't want to kick more of it to other people out there. Here's an accurate political question for you. What are the key differences between the major political parties on issues such as healthcare and taxation? I'm going to tell you there is variation, obviously, within the party. Taxation is the easiest way to differentiate in some ways. Republicans and Democrats, and I'm assuming when you say parties, you're referring to the two major parties there. Democrats love taxes. There's no such thing as enough taxes, and Republicans want less taxes. And so if you want a smaller, less abusive government, you're generally going to fall into the category of being a Republican. If you think that the government can do no wrong and there's no limit to the amount of money that people should be able to, that the government should extract from you, you're going to be on the Democrat side. On average, in between, there's gray area, and people fall out in that area too. Healthcare is totally different. Healthcare is a confusing program in a lot of ways for most people because of the way that healthcare is provided. And it's one of the most heavily regulated, intervened in element of what used to be a private sector part of life in America. And it's not really private sector anymore. It's dominated by the insurance companies who are regulated and directed by government as to what they can and cannot do. I mean, if you have any family members at all who work in medical billing, you'd know what I'm saying. I mean, it's just this endless piles of regulation getting worse every single day that pile up, and they have oftentimes more people working in the medical setting having to do with compliance and dealing with billing than they do who actually are providing health services, which is one of the reasons why it's so expensive. I think generally on the Republican side, they're looking for solutions. They want to make it lower costs, more freedom, more choice. On the Democrat side, the tendency has been shifting into single-payer, government-provided, rationed healthcare, and that's the general layout of where these two things come from. How did you think? So, well, I didn't think. That's a good question. How do you think this Bob Ferguson's was going to play out? I didn't think that Bob Ferguson would threaten to put people in prison, so that was an element that was very unusual. So once you get that point where somebody's going to threaten to imprison their political opponents and prevent these guys from running for office and providing a choice, not an echo on the ballot, then everything's out the window and it just doesn't matter. Giving them a chance to run for governor, and in one case particularly, both of them had wanted to do this, but it doesn't really matter. If you're not allowed to run for office and you're getting squeezed out because you're being threatened, you can't blame them for deciding that they didn't want to face imprisonment for having the temerity to actually step up and run for government. It's ridiculous. Let's see. Besides the childlike behavior, this is Jason. What are the issues that Sideshow Bob is running on? Will he run on or from his record as AG? Bob Ferguson right now is running the most deceptive political campaign probably in Washington state history, even more than Inslee. Remember when Inslee was lying and said that he wasn't going to increase taxes? Well, Bob Ferguson's trying to tell you that he was helpful in some way of making the state a safer place, and he wasn't. There is no single individual in the state of Washington who's done more to actually make Washington less safe than Bob Ferguson. He is pro-criminal, pro-violent crime, pro-violent sex predator release, pro-early release of violent felons, pro-removing your ability to defend yourself. In every way, Bob Ferguson has gone down the path that makes you and I less safe in the state when it comes to public safety. He's purposely ignored every element of violence and riots all around him unless he can use it for political gain in some narrow setting, like attacking you because he doesn't like you or attacking his political opponents because he doesn't like him. Otherwise, he's totally fine with violence and car theft and retail theft, and he'll do nothing to stop it because that appears to be the agenda right now on the Democrat Party side, and he's bought it hook, line, and sinker. Anyway, what about the guaranteed income bill? I don't think it's going to pass. So remember, we got legislative session isn't until January. So I think we're a little early on that one. Will the SCOTUS Oregon homeless camping case do much for Washington, or will Inslee and Bob just push it off until it's out of the news? Well, I think it could, but we'll have to see how it gets implemented. Again, you got to be involved in all these other local, right? It makes a difference, even just some shifts in the legislature. I think that'll make a bit of a difference here too, in getting more good people into office. And I know I'm kind of coming up on my time here, and there's so many questions. I'm having a hard time getting on top of this. There are a lot of questions, guys. I wasn't able to even get remotely close to any of these other questions. Let's see. I'm going to jump on this one, though, right now. It kind of popped out at me. I had a letter come in from the election office requesting signature verification. Never seen this before, and it came after voting Republican. Coincidence or fishy? That it's actually fishy a little bit on the timing that you never seen it before, but these are not uncommon. So depending on what county you're in, that'll happen sometimes. If your signatures change a bit over time, if they're having problems with their signature verification machine, you might get that. Or if somebody's trying to capture your ballot and sign for you, and then if there's some game going on, I would get on top of that and probably go into the auditor's office just to make sure that that's not going on. Let's see. The million of salmon killed, will the Department of Ecology hold Inslee responsible? And the answer is no, and the Department of Ecology doesn't care about salmon being killed. They just care about having a bigger budget and increasing the number of employees who work there. And if you don't believe me, assuming you can still get into the lobby, because they lock it now, but in the lobby downtown the Department of Ecology, there's a big poster that they'd had up for at least a decade that simply showed the growth. The only thing they cared about, they don't have anything about the water being cleaner, the air being cleaner, or anything else in Washington State being cleaner or better because of their existence. All they had was this chart that simply showed the growth of the Department of Ecology and the number of employees. Because at the end of the day, that's what a bureaucrat and a bureaucracy tends to support, perpetuating itself and growing itself. And the Department of Ecology at least was honest, because that was the only thing they had prioritized in their lobby, is this big display and a chart. So they don't care about the salmon there. Arguably, some of the Fish and Wildlife employees probably do, which is a different agency, but they certainly don't care about it there. So anyway, with that, guys, I am probably just not going to be able to answer some of the rest of these questions because we're kind of running out of time. There were a lot of people that logged on today. I know when I haven't done a live stream in a while, that seems to generate a little bit more people logging in. But if you like the show today, please feel free to subscribe down below. If you haven't subscribed already, please encourage others to do that, and then share the video that I'm going to put out a little while from now, about Bob Ferguson threatening to imprison his political opponents. So with that, I hope that I did somewhat of a decent job answering some of these questions. Hope to be back on a regular schedule again next week, and we'll see you then, and we will see how it goes. And I expect that now that filing week is closed, we'll have some other drama to talk about. I also have a court case that was recently resolved. If you remember, I did a story a couple years ago about fake ghost classes at Western Washington University, that they were basically creating fake credits and fake ghost classes for students there. And when their internal auditor blew the whistle on it, she was fired. And so she just won her lawsuit, a $3 million judgment against Western Washington University, something well-deserved that they deserve to pay. And the corruption that she revealed there simply illustrates the vast corruption that exists in the majority of these state agencies in their effort to suppress whistleblowers. I'm very glad that the jury was able to see through that, and the $3 million judgment is certainly going to be worth talking about, and I plan to talk about it next time. So hope all's well, and we will see you next time.